Now I really would like to introduce Jay Dardenne, the Lieutenant Governor from Louisiana. He has been a friend and supporter of the America's Wetland Foundation for a long time. And quite frankly, he has provided leadership that it was critical for us to move forward on many occasions. He's a champion of this effort, a champion of the need to truly begin to put focus on this river and its issues so that the country can begin to deal with it as it should have. Jay, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, King. And thanks to Governor Quinn, who I know is traveling all over the state today and had to make a hasty departure. But I want to thank him for his leadership and his involvement with this very progressive and important initiative. I think Mud to Marsh is what we probably ought to call the initiative he just created. You know, I'm only going to be here today. I'll have to leave early tomorrow morning. I'm not going to get to see a Cubs game, I regret, or a Sox game. But talking about Minneapolis, it reminded me one of my favorite all-time baseball quotes was from the owner of the Minnesota Twins, who struggled when they first moved to Minnesota. And he said this, he said, the fans love home runs, and we've assembled a pitching staff to give the fans what they want. And we now have to try and see if we can figure out maybe what we want and what we need to make sure that we sustain this great river. Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, you know, reminded us you can't always get what you want, but you get what you need. Well, we know what we need to sustain this river, and this is the culmination of a series of meetings that has provided great insight as to how we go about satisfying those needs. And I know today is going to be equally productive, and the end result, as I know you've heard, will be a series of recommendations and hopefully a progressive initiative that all of us will look back on and say that the America's Wetland Foundation laid the groundwork to make certain that we sustain the great Mississippi for years to come. I want to take just a few minutes before we get into the more substantive discussion and reflect a little bit on some comments I made in Minneapolis. And I apologize if some of you have heard this, but I want to draw on some of those remarks if you'll allow me a Louisiana analogy. Like a Mardi Gras parade winding its way through the streets of New Orleans, the river meanders throughout the heartland of America. The parade features floats, that word being used as a noun, and the river offers opportunities to use that same word as a verb. Mardi Gras is presided over by a king, and the Mississippi River is the king of all the rivers. And Mardi Gras revelers clamor for beads and other goodies tossed along the parade route, and the great river gives as well, depositing its rich sediment along the banks as it hurtles toward the Gulf of Mexico. Both the parade and the river have a beginning and an end, and just as parade goers and participants disperse, the Mississippi River leaves its leveed banks to disappear into the vast Gulf of Mexico through its countless bird-feet tributaries at the river's delta. The analogy for Louisiana is quite important because obviously as the mouth of the river, everything flows through our state into the Gulf of Mexico. And as the governor mentioned, and as all of you know, from an economic standpoint, Louisiana's coast and the entire Gulf Coast is really the economic lifeblood of this nation. The story of this river, you know, goes back 7,500 years or more, and as those rapid waters of the river deposited rich sediment along the banks, creating the most fertile farmland arguably on the planet. And since its discovery back in the mid-1500s, its exploration about a decade later, it's been the object of affection for the French and the Spanish and the British and ultimately the Americans. It was a thread connecting seafarers from the southern half of the continent to the north. It was the portal to exploration and the literal vessel that enabled America to develop an agrarian society and to transform itself into an industrialized and mechanized powerhouse. We simply can't underestimate the historical significance to America's westward expansion and the pivotal role that New Orleans and the Delta played and continues to play in our nation's economy. The Louisiana Purchase came about, creating 15 states in the United States of America, because everybody coveted New Orleans, the pathway into this new, at the time, new continent, this new world that people wanted to explore. And centuries later, the might and the mystery and the majesty of this river has elevated its role as really the defining manifestation of American ingenuity, creativity, and certainly culture and lore. During these centuries, great debates have been had about harnessing the river's power and channeling its flow, regulating its navigation, protecting the population from its ravages. And exactly 86 years ago today, which happened to have been Good Friday, the greatest of 5 massive storms that hit the central part of the United States in the first 4 months of 1927 dumped 15 inches of water on New Orleans, the greatest rainfall ever known there. In that year, the Great Flood of 1927 resulted in the loss of thousands of lives and the inundation of thousands and thousands of acres in the heartland of America. The response was a massive governmental effort to levee the river and try to seize control of the power of that river. We've succeeded in large part in containing the river in its path to the Gulf, but not without a steep price. We've prevented the natural deposit of sediment at the river's mouth, and it's clearly a contributing factor to the literal loss of a football field of land almost every hour. A football field of land almost every hour just disappears into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's the manifestation of what has brought us together today. The America's Wetland Foundation recognizing the critical importance of stemming that loss and making certain that everyone along the river recognizes the need for its sustainability. Throughout these programs, the fifth one now, we've heard testimony about what makes the river great and what challenges us to keep it working environmentally and economically. These two needs go hand in hand, and the Mississippi is in dire and perhaps desperate need of America's attention to make certain that the 31 states and the 2 Canadian provinces that compose its watershed and the entire nation recognizes that we all benefit from stability and sustainability. And that's really the message, I think, today as we go forward. The mission is the sustainability of this river and looking at it from all the different perspectives that all of us around this table bring and all the expertise that's been brought to bear throughout these discussions to try and make absolutely certain that our main mission is to sustain the river, recognizing that that's good for everybody. And with all the sometimes competing missions and sometimes collaborative missions that exist as we go through these discussions, the ultimate goal, I think, is to be absolutely certain that we take all viewpoints into consideration, that we leave here with a series of recommendations that hopefully will lead to positive action that is going to ensure the sustainability of this river for generations to come. And thanks to all of you for being a part of this discussion. I'm looking forward to the continuing dialogue today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jay.